was that there had been traffic or people out on the street where one of the bodies had been found. That told me that the killer knew how to blend in, and that he possibly was a black man. Around 6 that night, I finally headed home. This was supposed to be my day off. I had things to do there, and I was trying to balance the demands of the job and home life as best I could. I put on a happy face and headed inside the house. Damon, Janny, and Nana were singing Sit Down, You Rockin' the Boat in the kitchen. The show tune was music to my ears and other essential parts of my anatomy. The kids looked happy as could be. There was a lot to be said for the innocence of childhood. I heard Nana say, "How about I can tell the world?" Then the three of them launched into one of the most beautiful spirituals I know. Damon's voice seemed particularly strong to me. I hadn't really noticed that before. "I feel like I just walked into a story by Louisa May Alcott," I said, laughing for the first time that long day. "I take that as a high compliment," Nana said. She was somewhere between her late 70s and early 80s now, but not telling, also not showing her age. "Who's Louise May Alcott?" Janny said, and made a lemon-sucking face. She is a healthy little skeptic, though almost never a cynic. In that way, she takes after both her father and her grandmother. "Look it up tonight, little one. 50 cents in your pocket for the correct answer," I told her. "You're on," Janny grinned. "You can pay me right now if you like." "Me too?" Damon asked. "Of course. You can look up Jane Austen," I said to him. "Now, what's with the heavenly harmonizing? I like it very much, by the way. I just want to know what the special occasion is." "We're just singing while we prepare dinner," Nana said, and stuck up her nose and twinkled her eyes. "You play jazz and blues on the piano, don't you? We harmonize like angels sometimes. No special reason necessary. Good for the soul, and soul food, I suppose, can't hurt." After one of Nana's roast chicken dinners, with baked sweet potatoes and homemade bread, I took the kids downstairs for their weekly boxing lesson. Following the Tuesday night fight with the kids, I glanced at my watch and saw it was already a little past 9. The doorbell rang a moment later. I sat down a terrific book called The Color of Water and pushed myself up from my chair in the family room. "I'll get it. It's probably for me," I called out. "Maybe it's Christine, you never know," Janny teased, then darted away into the kitchen. Both of the kids adored Christine, in spite of the fact that she was the principal at their school. I knew exactly who was out on the porch. I had been expecting 4 homicide detectives from the 1st District: Jerome Thurman, Rakeem Powell, Sean Moore, and Sampson. 3 of the detectives were standing out on the porch. Rosie the cat and I let them inside. Sampson arrived about 5 minutes later, and we all gathered in the backyard. What we were doing at the house wasn't illegal, but it wouldn't make us a lot of friends in high places in the police department. We sat on lawn chairs, and I set out beer and low-fat pretzels that the 270-pound Jerome scoffed at. "Beer and low-fat pretzels? Give me a break, Alex." "I bought these for you, big man. I'm trying to give your heart a break," I told him, and the others guffawed loudly. We all pick on Jerome. The 5 of us had been getting together informally for a couple of weeks. We were beginning to work on the Jane Does, as we called them. Homicide had no official investigation going on. It wasn't trying to link the murders to a serial killer. I tried to start one and been turned down by Chief Pittman. He claimed that I hadn't discovered a pattern linking any of the murders, and besides that, he didn't have any extra detectives for duty in Southeast. "I suppose you've all heard about Nina Charles by now?" Sampson asked the other detectives. All of them had known Nina. "The good die young." Rakeem Powell frowned severely and shook his head. "Rakeem is smart and tough and could go all the way in the department. Least they do in Southeast." His eyes went cold and hard. I told him what I knew, especially that Nina had been found with no ID. I mentioned everything else I had noticed at the tenement crime scene. I also took the occasion to talk some more about the rash of unsolved murders in Southeast. I went over the devastating stats I had compiled, mostly in my free time. "Statistic like that in Georgetown or the Capital District, people in this city be enraged, going ballistic. Be Washington Post headlines every day. The president himself be involved. Money no object. National tragedy." Jerome Thurman railed on and waved his arms around like signal flags. "Well, we are here to do something about it," I said in a calmer voice. "Money is no object with us, neither is time. Let me tell you what I feel about this killer. I think I know a few things about him. How'd you come up with the profile? Sean Moore asked. How can you stand thinking about these kinky bastards as much as you do? I shrugged. It's what I do best. I've analyzed all the Jane Does, I said. It took me weeks working on my own. Just me and the kinky bastard. I told him what I had so far. I think one male is responsible for at least some of the killings, maybe as many as a dozen murders. I don't think he's a brilliant killer like Gary Sinigi or Mr. Smith, but he's clever enough not to be caught. He's organized, reasonably careful. I don't think we'll find he has any prior record. He probably has a decent job, maybe even a family. My FBI friends at Quantico agree with that. He's almost definitely caught up in an escalating fantasy cycle. I think he's into his fantasies, big time. Maybe he's in the process of becoming someone or something new. He might be forming a new personality for himself. He isn't finished with the killing. Not by any means. I'll make some educated guesses. He hates his old self, though the people closest to him probably don't realize it. He might be ready to abandon his family, job, any friends he has. At one time he probably had very strong feelings and beliefs about something, law and order, religion, the government, but not anymore. He kills in different ways. There's no set formula. He knows a lot about killing people. He's used different kinds of weapons. He may have traveled overseas, or maybe spent some time in Asia. I think it's very possible he's a black man. He's killed several times in Southeast, and no one's noticed him. Fuck me, Jerome Thurman said to that. Any good news, Alex? One thing, and this is a long shot, but it feels right to me. I think he might be suicidal. It fits the profile I'm working on. He's living dangerously, taking a lot of chances. He might just blow himself up. Pop goes the Weasel, Sampson said. That was how we came to name the killer, the Weasel.
Jeffrey Schaefer looked forward to playing the Four Horsemen every Thursday night from 9 until about 1 in the morning. The fantasy game was everything to him. There were 3 other master players around the world. The players were the rider on the white horse, Conqueror, the rider on the red horse, War, the rider on the black horse, Famine, and himself, the rider on the pale horse, Death. Lucy and the children knew they were forbidden to disturb him for any reason once he locked himself into the library on the 2nd floor. On one wall was his collection of ceremonial daggers, nearly all of them purchased in Hong Kong and Bangkok. Also on the wall was the rowing oar from the year his college team had won the Bumps. Schaefer nearly always won the games he played. He had been using the internet to communicate with the other players for years, long before the rest of the world caught on. Conqueror played from the town of Dorking in Surrey, outside London. Famine travelled back and forth between Bangkok, Sydney, Melbourne, and Manila. And War usually played out of Jamaica, where he had a large estate on the sea. They had been playing horsemen for 7 years. Rather than becoming repetitive, the fantasy game had expanded itself. It had grown every year, becoming something new and even more challenging. The object was to create the most delicious and unusual fantasy or adventure. Violence was almost always part of the game, but not necessarily murder. Schaefer had been the first to claim that his stories weren't fantasies at all, that he lived them in the real world. Now the others would do so as well, from time to time. Whether they really lived their fantasies, Schaefer couldn't tell. The object was to create the evening's most startling fantasy, to get a rise out of the other players. At 9 o'clock, his time, Schaefer was on his laptop. So were the others. It was rare for one of them to miss a session, but if he did, he left lengthy messages and sometimes drawings or even photographs of supposed lovers or victims. Films were occasionally used, and the other players then had to decide whether the scenes were stage-acted or cinema verite. The Four Horsemen was unique in so many ways, but most important was the fact that there was no single game master to outline and control the action of the game. Each of the players had complete autonomy to write and visualize his own story, as long as he played by the roll of the dice and remained inside the parameters of the character. In effect, in Horsemen there were 4 game masters. There was no other fantasy game like it. It was as gruesome and shocking as the participants' imaginations and their skills at presentation made them. Conqueror, famine, and war had all signed on. Schaefer began to type. Death has triumphed again in Washington. Let me tell you the details. Then I'll listen to the glorious stories, the imaginative power of conqueror, famine, and war. I live for this, as I know all of you do as well. This weekend I drove my fantastic taxi, the Nightmare Machine, once again. Listen to this. I came upon several choice and delectable victims, but I rejected them as unworthy. Then I found my queen. And she reminded me of our days in Bangkok and Manila. Who could ever forget the bloodlust of the boxing arena? I held a mock kickboxing match. Gentlemen, I beat her with my hands and feet. I am sending pictures.
Something was up, and I didn't think I'd like it very much. I arrived at the 7th District Police Station just before 7:30 the following morning. I'd been summoned by the powers that be to the station, and it was a tough deal. I'd worked until 2 in the morning trying to get a lead on Nina Child's murder. I had a feeling that the day was starting out wrong. I was tense and more uptight than I usually let myself become. I didn't like this early morning command appearance one bit. I shook my head, frowned, tried to roll the kinks out of my neck. Finally, I gritted my teeth tightly before opening the mahogany door. Chief of Detectives George Pittman was lying in wait in his office, which in fact consists of 3 connecting offices, including a conference room. The Jefe, as he's called by his many admirers, had on a boxy gray business suit, an overstarched white shirt, and a silver necktie. His gray and white streaked hair was slicked back. He looked like a banker, and in some ways he is one, as he never tires of saying he's working with a fixed budget and is always mindful of manpower costs, overtime costs, caseload costs. Apparently he is an efficient manager, which is why the police commissioner overlooks the fact that he's a bully, bigot, racist, and careerist. Up on his wall were 3 large, important-looking pushpin maps. The first showed 2 consecutive months of rapes, homicides, and assaults in Washington. The second map did the same for residential and commercial burglaries. The third map showed auto thefts. The maps and the Post said that crime was down in D.C., but not where I live. "Do you know why you're here, and why I wanted to see you?" Pittman asked point blank. "Of course you do, Dr. Cross. You're a psychologist. You're supposed to know how the human mind works. I keep forgetting that." I did the thing Chief Pittman least expected. I smiled, then said softly, "No, I really don't know. I got a call from your assistant. So I'm here." "You're not fooling anybody, Cross, least of all me. I'm fully fucking aware that you're investigating homicides in Southeast that you aren't assigned to, the so-called Jane Does. You're doing this against my explicit orders. Some of those cases have been closed for over a year. I won't have it. I won't tolerate your insubordination, your condescending attitude. I know what you're trying to pull. Embarrass the department, specifically embarrass me, curry fucking favor with the mayor, making yourself some kind of folk hero in Southeast in the process." I hated Pittman's tone, and what he was saying, but I learned one trick a long time ago, and it is probably the most important thing to know about politics inside any organization. Knowledge truly is power. It's everything. If you don't have any, pretend you do. So I told Chief Pittman nothing. I didn't contradict him. I didn't admit to a thing. I did nothing. I let him think that maybe I was investigating old cases in Southeast, but I didn't admit to it. I also let him think that maybe I had some powerful connections with Mayor Monroe, and God only knows who else in the city on the hill. I let him think that maybe I was after his job, or that I might have, God forbid, even loftier aspirations. "I'm working on the homicides assigned to me. Check with the captain. I'm doing my best to close as many cases as I can." Pittman nodded curtly. One nod. His face was heart-attack red. "All right. I want you to close this case. I want you to close it fast. A tourist was robbed and gunned down on M Street last night," he said. "A well-respected German doctor from Munich. It's front fucking page in today's Post, not to mention the International Herald Tribune, and every newspaper in Germany, of course. I want you on that murder case, and I want it solved, pronto." "This doctor, he's a white man?" I asked, keeping my expression neutral. "I told you, he's German." "I already have a number of open cases in Southeast," I said to Pittman. "A nurse was murdered over the weekend." He didn't want to hear it. He shook his head, one shake.